Renault's Formula 1 team warned the world it would have a tough start to 2024 when the new Alpine A524 was launched, but when team principal Bruno Famin said it was going to be difficult, even he can't have known just how bad it was going to get. Alpine drivers Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly locked out the back row in qualifying for the season-opening Bahrain Grand Prix, and that was absolutely representative of the car's lack of pace. The team expected the race to be better, but it wasn't. The Alpines finished 17th and 18th, with the drivers behind Valtteri Bottas and Logan Sargent only there as a result of hitting problems in the race. The evidence is clear. Alpine is dead last. And to add to the sense of woe engulfing this team, news emerged on the day of the Bahrain Grand Prix that technical director Matt Harman and head of aerodynamics Dirk de Beer had resigned. This has led to a restructure of the technical leadership of the team that we'll explain later in this video. They didn't quit in a fury amid a terrible weekend, they resigned in the build-up to the season. Not that it was communicated to the team's staff as quickly as it should have been, many of whom first heard about it from the media. This all comes only 7 months after the last sudden upheaval in the Renault-owned team, when team principal Otmar Szafnauer and sporting director Alain Permain left amid disagreements with the ownership on the timeline for success. It's doubtful that even their most negative estimates will have put the team last at the start of this season. It's clear things have gone badly wrong. The question is, why? The Alpine A524 has a number of problems. First and foremost, it's overweight. There's talk of it being 11 kilos over the 798 kilo minimum. Pierre Gasly was asked about that after qualifying and said it's not as bad as you mentioned, but he did confirm there was a weight problem. However, if it's anywhere near 10 kilos, that's a significant penalty. The rule of thumb is that 10 kilos costs you 3 to 4 tenths of a second per lap, depending on the track configuration. The weight problem is primarily down to the monocoque failing the side impact test. The monocoque was designed with weight-saving measures incorporated. To put it simply, there are areas internally where it's understood to have empty space rather than being solid carbon fibre. The load case simulations said the design was strong enough, but apparently it failed the test emphatically. As a result, the monocoques have been reinforced, and that has come at a significant weight cost. The car is also weak in terms of traction, and Harman admitted there's a need for that to improve. The drivers have been complaining of mid-corner understeer, which will compound the traction problem if the car is under-rotated when the power is fed in with more steering lock than is ideal. Overall, the impression is of a car lacking in downforce, not just battling the front-end limitation that all teams struggle with in slow corners in particular under these ground effect rules, but also a deficit at the rear aerodynamically. That's the result of missed aero targets in the development of the car, and while Harman described it as a car that's broadly in line with expectations in terms of characteristics, it's a long way off where it needs to be in terms of performance. What's more, it still has a power unit deficit of around 15 brake horsepower, and while measures have been taken with this car to increase the efficiency in terms of how that power is used by cutting back on what are called parasitic losses created by the car, for example by modifying the exhaust, that weakness is here to stay. That's why Ocon and Gasly struggled so badly in Bahrain. The Alpine is, extraordinarily for a works team, the slowest car on the grid, and that's not going to change quickly. The team and drivers are trying to present a business-as-usual front, admitting the car is underperforming but talking of good things to come. Famin said after the race over social media that the positive is everyone is pushing, and he promised Alpine would do better in Saudi Arabia. The trouble is, by the time he spoke after the race, it had already emerged that Harman and de Beer had resigned. This news came as a shock to many Alpine staff and wasn't widely known even among the trackside team heading into the race. The race understands that Harman resigned once the chassis had completed the homologation process required to participate in testing. However, he stayed on to work trackside to oversee testing and the Bahrain Grand Prix and has worked on the formulation of the early season upgrade plan. De Beer tendered his resignation in the build-up to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Harman and de Beer are also understood to have taken these decisions purely for their own reasons, rather than being sacked and then these sackings being dressed up as resignations. The poor performance of the car will have been the primary reason for their decisions to quit, and to make clear how disappointing the progress is, Alpine made the smallest step in lap time of all 10 teams compared to Bahrain 2023, based on qualifying times. However, whether the resignations came as a result of frustration that Alpine doesn't have the resources and facilities needed to deliver the ambitious car that was touted as a change of concept, or were more about Harman and de Beer carrying the can for the poor performance, is unclear. In de Beer's case, it's clear the aero shortcomings of the car will have been a factor. De Beer has plenty of F1 experience, including spells with Williams and Ferrari, as well as an earlier one at Enstone. As head of aero, the responsibility for the downforce deficit ultimately falls on his shoulders. As technical director, Harman was ultimately responsible for the car and was the key decision maker when it came to projects such as the chassis. However, if the simulation tools available to evaluate the loads it would be subjected to were misleading, that hints again at problems with the available equipment and facilities. Their resignations meant Alpine had to act quickly to ensure the inevitable disruption was minimised. Although the Alpine team was naive in imagining the news of Harman and de Beer resigning wouldn't get out in Bahrain, management did eventually inform team personnel. While some were eventually notified on race day, it wasn't until Monday after the race that there was a team-wide announcement, which both Harman and de Beer participated in. Alpine also announced what it calls a new three-pillared approach to its technical leadership. This follows the path taken by McLaren with its changes last year, appointing a trio of chassis technical directors. These are all internal promotions. Joe Burnell has been appointed Technical Director Engineering, with David Wheater, Technical Director Aerodynamics, and Kieran Pilbeam, Technical Director Performance. Power Unit Technical Director Eric Maignan, who is based at Viry-Châtillon in France, remains in place. All four report to Team Principal Bruno Famin. Changes to the technical structure are understood to have been under consideration for some time, although it is possible Harman and de Beer have hastened that process by quitting. In its press release announcing the changes, Alpine stated that the decision comes after a period of disappointing results, where the team has fallen from finishing 4th in the 2022 championship to 6th in 2023, missing several key targets in its ambitions to reach the front of the grid. The new structure is logical, as McLaren has proved, and the three technical directors appointed are all very capable, but the question is whether or not Alpine can make it work. Despite the resignations of Harman and de Beer, there's still a team of hard-working, high-quality people working flat out to improve the Alpine A524. The question is, can it be made competitive? There are upgrades on the way, anticipated to appear after the early races. As Harman said at the start of the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, the team has a plan for reducing the weight, although this is a long-term project rather than a quick fix. But could there be a McLaren 2023 style turnaround in store? Well, Ocon talked about this possibility, but there is a key difference between Alpine today and McLaren 12 months ago. While Alpine has done half of the job McLaren did by starting the season with an underperforming car, there's nothing to suggest it worked out a dramatic change of direction over the winter that would just take a little more time to bring to the track, as McLaren did. And that's the difficult bit. Alpine is only talking about gradual improvement. The one hope is that the much vaunted change in concept, which is focused on modifications to the way the suspension works, has unlocked significantly more development potential. But the jury is still out on whether the team really has enough understanding of how the aerodynamics and the mechanical platforms interact. The other tiny ray of hope is that Bahrain has traditionally been a poor track for this team. It certainly plays against the car, given it's a heavily traction-dependent circuit that rewards power. In the high-speed S's from turns 5 to 7, the Alpine was probably at its best in Bahrain. That means it is expected to be slightly less terrible in Jeddah this weekend. As Harman says, definitive conclusions can't be drawn from Bahrain because of the track characteristics, but even caveated conclusions won't be good, and it's clear the car is far below even the lowest acceptable level for a works team. And even if it does climb the order, it's difficult to see Alpine even matching last year's underwhelming 6th place in the Constructors' Championship, never mind bettering it. After major changes were made mid-season last year with the departures of Zafnauer and Permain, and it's important to note that these changes happened just before Alpine switched its full development focus to the 2024 car, there was a fresh wave of optimism. The changes were made because of a fundamental disagreement between Zafnauer and Renault about how long it would take to reach the competitive targets. Presumably, those objectives did not include being at the back when the 2024 season got underway. This team has been blighted by long-term plans for success, starting with the original 5-year plan to become a title-challenging team when Renault bought the ailing Genii Capital-owned Lotus outfit ahead of 2016. That timeline was modified when it became clear the scale of the task was too big. It was replaced with a 100-race plan touted by then Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi in 2021. That too has been abandoned. Famin now eschews such targets and talks instead of constant improvement in all areas. He has talked consistently about the gains made with the trackside operation since the middle of last year and wants that to translate to the factories at Enstone and Viry. That messaging is correct insofar as if a team like Alpine keeps improving in all areas, it will eventually get there. However, the on-track performance raises big questions about whether that intention is being delivered on. And this is why Renault's attitude matters. Ever since it returned to F1 as a team owner, the emphasis has been on efficiency and doing more with less. F1's cost cap, which limits not only operational spending but also capital expenditure, sets a limit on the cash that can be poured in. But there are still doubts about whether this team has the full resources it needs to keep improving its facilities. The endless cycle of optimism after getting to the front of the midfield, followed by regression, followed by changes, followed by optimism, followed by regression, followed by changes, is getting very old. At some point, you have to ask whether the problem isn't the revolving door of team leadership and technical departments and instead lies with the ownership, and that means Renault. Remember when Pat Fry quit Alpine last year to move to Williams? It was largely because he didn't feel there was the enthusiasm or drive to do better than fourth. After leaving Alpine for Aston Martin at the end of 2022, Fernando Alonso too suggested a lack of ambition within the organisation, saying they were happy with fourth. How Renault and the Alpine F1 team react is a big test of how serious it is. There is optimism for 2026, and Famin claims the new power unit project is progressing well. But Alpine will need to be full steam ahead on that car at the start of January 2025, and doubts remain over whether its facilities are really up to producing a car that runs at the front, and that's where a works team needs to be. This latest chaos and the handling of it raises yet more questions about whether this team can ever realise its F1 ambitions, and if that's the case, you have to ask whether the time will soon come when Renault needs to sell up and ship out.